In a way, AWS Reinvent was like an Apple event. There was the iPhone 14 was not really that dramatically different to iPhone 13.
When you're developing an app, security might be treated as an afterthought. With functionality requirements and tight deadlines, it's easy to accidentally write vulnerable code or use a vulnerable dependency. But Sneak can help you secure your code in real time, so you don't need to slow down to build securely. Develop fast, stay secure. Good developer. Sneak.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast. This is the final episode for the season 3 of Cloud Security Podcast. Thank you to everyone who has been supporting us for such a long time. And for this episode, I have the better half of the Cloud Security Podcast, Shilpi Bhattacharjee. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I was just saying, when you were saying the fact that it's a final episode of 2022 season 3, it's always one of those things you kind of feel like, just time goes so quickly, and I hate wrapping up it for the season, but it's also exciting because what's going to be there for the next season as well. So it is always bittersweet.
Bittersweet it is today. We're going to talk about AWS Reinvent 2022. We were there, met a lot of people on the ground. We met a lot of people during the sessions, a lot of interesting conversations. We wanted to cover the keynote in terms of what were some of the highlights from the CEO and the CTO. For people who are in the security space, you'll probably realize if you work in tech, one of the most important things you can do is listen to what your CTO and your CEO are saying, because that gives you a direction for where the business is heading. Then we also point out some of our favorite talks. Spoiler alert, I think the talks that we have picked up are the ones that are not AWS talks. They're talks by people who have actually solved a problem using a solution. So that was our focus there. And then towards the later half, and the main crux of it, is we talk about the announcements. Now, announcements focusing more on if there was a security product, if there was an existing update to a security product, or is there a product that you should be aware of, which is getting an update from a security perspective. Actually, there's a fourth one as well, which is technically, because there were a lot of announcements that came in just before AWS Reinvent started. There were a few which would not technically be classified as cloud security, but we believe would have an impact in the cloud security space as we go into 2023. So all that, a lot more. I will let Shilpi kick it off with the first one.
Thank you. So as Ashish said, AWS Reinvent is just one of those conferences that there's a lot happening. There's lots of talks, lots of keynotes, which is different because usually when you attend a conference, there'll be one, at most 2 keynotes. But for AWS Reinvent, there's actually multiple. I think there were about 5 keynotes, if I remember correctly. But from a security perspective, I think the ones that you probably want to pay attention to is the one from the CEO and also from the CTO. So from the CEO, a couple of not cloud security, but interesting things. The first thing that he spoke a lot about was sustainability. And I know a lot of our audience members are quite passionate about sustainability. And AWS has been kind of making a lot of comments about sustainability for a few years now. And they revisited some of their goals, which was they want to be 100% on renewable energy by 2025. And they made a comment that they're almost 85% there. They also said they wanted to be one of the leading water efficiency amongst all the cloud providers and be water positive by 2030. So those were a couple of call outs. And I think we often forget the environmental cost of technology and using cloud and all those things on the environment. So it was good to sort of have that nod, and it'll be interesting to see how that's comparing to some of the other cloud providers. So just a bit of a heads up, there may be something exciting coming in that sense. Also, there was a lot of talk about cost saving, and I think this is really a nod to what's kind of happening in the global environment at the moment. Obviously, we are facing sort of a slight shift in the economic standpoint at the moment. And I think looking at that, has obviously made a few comments about that, how leaning into cloud in times of difficulty is actually a good idea. So if you're planning to tighten your belt, for some organizations, that might be a priority at the moment. Cloud is probably the best place to do it. Now, whether or not everyone agrees with that, I think the jury is still probably out, but that was a comment that they did make. And yes, I mean, there is a cost of going to cloud, but there is obviously some cost savings down the track as well. They made an example of Airbnb. So they said that they were able to reduce their spending on cloud by 63 million when, they were going through a difficult time. So that was kind of an interesting example they mentioned. So those are probably some of the thematic things that they spoke about. One thing that I really connected with on the keynote is something that the CEO said is security is like finding the right balance between control and access. And I thought that was something that really resonated with me, because That is exactly what it is. It's about making sure everyone has access and is being able to do what they need to do on cloud. But there is that sense of control as well. So I thought that was something, a really interesting way to think about security. They did mention that their top priority has always been security from the beginning. And they also gave a nod to the fact that the Options Clearing Corp, which is one of the really important bodies in the financial market, is actually moving to the cloud as well. And this is like a once in a generation kind of shift for an organization to move in the cloud. So just kind of mentioning that there are all these like really big organizations that are moving to cloud, and the cloud migration process is still one of those things that is still starting off or in its nascent stage. There was an interesting comment around the fact that there is no trade-off between security and speed. I don't know, Ashish, if you will agree with that. I think that's the ideal thing, that you often don't want to have that trade-off. I think in real life and execution, and I know a lot of our audience members might chime in as well, that realistically sometimes there is a trade-off. I don't know what
Always,
your thoughts around that would be.
always a trade-off.
Always. Yes. I think 2022, everyone's talking about containers and Kubernetes. So I don't think they would have kind of missed out on saying that. So they did mention that containers are becoming increasingly popular. And what you need right now is right tools to secure them. And this is very much in line with our Kubernetes security episode, a month that we did. And a lot of conversations that we had with the experts was around that the adoption of Kubernetes has increased. But a lot of people are struggling with the Kubernetes security side of things just because it is just such a complex environment. And I think that is something that the CEO of AWS made a mention to. I did want to sort of mention one thing about AWS Supply Chain. So they did release a product called AWS Supply Chain. And if you had just sort of heard a few rumblings from the keynote or walking around the AWS Reinvent force, you may have gotten excited that they've released something to solve digital supply chain and all these problems that we were talking about. And I've been talking a lot about digital supply chain and how it's broken and we need to fix it. And AWS has come out with AWS Supply Chain to fix it all. But just TLDR, this is more to do with the physical supply chain. So this product that they've launched is more to do with your logistics and all of those things. So I did have a glimmer of hope when I saw it on the keynote, and I thought, oh, this could be an interesting take, a cloud provider actually taking a leap to try to solve that. But yeah, just wanted to let you guys know that that is not anything to do with cloud security. It's more sort of their other side of the business.
Which is the actual supply chain, like actual
That's right.
conveyor belts and packages going from left and right.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's not a bad thing. It's just not a popular topic to talk about. Maybe that's why there was a peak of excitement and then suddenly they just went down because I guess how many people out there are using a conveyor belt right now? So it might be many, but it's definitely relevant for them. So yeah, we should definitely call it out.
Oh, definitely. I think like physical supply chain is a challenge for the community. It's just for us, the security folks, probably it's just the context that you live in. Because we work in cloud security, we just naturally think about digital supply chain, but the physical supply chain has been there for a long time, and that's a bigger problem to solve. So I just thought I'll save everyone a bit of excitement and letdown. And the other thing, this is not so much security, but I think it was just interesting that they have actually made all their analytics services serverless now. So any serverless fans out there, and I know there are a few, and everyone's hoping that that's going to be the next thing after containers. They have made that. So they had this last kind of open source thing that was one of their tools, Amazon open source, that allows you to do a lot of things with data. So they've made that now serverless as well, which means all of their analytics have now become serverless. So that's just something there for the serverless folks out there. Just quickly moving on to the next keynote, and this was by
was it open source or open search?
Open search, not open source. Yeah. Open source, and it's a data sort of, I think you can do a lot of things in data with that product, but not open source. That would be good if they do.
Amazon open source is a great service. Maybe a good one to add for Amazon later on. But it's
Amazon digital supply chain and Amazon open source. So the next one, I always like to liken the keynote from Dr. Vogel, like the Steve Jobs of Apple. I know he's the CTO and not the CEO, but I feel people are often more excited now. Maybe just the security folks who are more excited about his keynote. And obviously that one was the one probably that had the most intriguing things. It felt very Matrix-like if you watch it. So maybe I think for anyone who does want to watch it, I would recommend watch the first 5-10 minutes just because it's entertaining. He goes into this alternative universe where someone's making one fry at a time, and he talks about this whole notion of things being synchronous, but how we live in an asynchronous world. And he gave an example of how birds, when they're making a flock, every bird kind of has these triggers to go into this flock separately, and together they become organized. Now, take what you will with that. I think he was just trying to come up with something that made sense. But I think the takeaway from that is what he was trying to say is that the world is event-driven and everything happens because there's an event and that drives it. And then he introduced the theme of event-driven architecture and an asynchronous principle. So that kind of drove all the different announcements. So we'll talk about the actual announcements and the security ones when we go into that section, because we just thought that'd be good to break that out. But his overall theme, apart from all the weird and wonderful Matrix-like and bird analogy, and you can make from that what you like, is the whole notion of event-driven architecture and the notion of asynchronous things. So those were like the takeaway from the keynotes, apart from, I guess, the security highlights, which we'll go into later.
The themes over here are important. Kind of going back to what we were saying in the beginning, why we called these out was the fact that listening to what the CEO and the CTO have said have always been a good pattern to see what Amazon would be pushing down through customers for the year after. It's been 11 years of AWS Reinvent, and every time something has been announced or shared on the big stage, either by customers who've come on the keynote with all these people. So all of them usually have customers who come and talk about it. One of the people who came for Vogel's talk was Angela. She was from Trustpilot. There are a lot of other people who came in as well. I think there was a keynote from Ferrari as well. But the point being, it's important to hear the CTO and CEO talk about what their vision of the world is, no matter how weird and full of birds it is.
Well, it makes you pay attention, right? If there's like birds and Matrix, like.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's trying to be creative, or his team is trying to be creative over there. So nothing against him. I'm just calling out that the importance of it is basically, if you're looking for ever themes for what Amazon is going to focus on for the year after or the next year, I normally keep an eye out on both, because that usually gives you a hint for where they are going. They have always believed in the event-driven architecture. A lot of people still believe in the event-driven architecture, but until 2022, the serverless architecture space has primarily been used for back-end tasks and not for, well, let's just say not a lot of companies have gone production on a fully serverless application. I'm sure there are many, but if you were to make a Venn diagram for it, it's primarily people are still using the traditional compute instead of using serverless. So, OG.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think that's one of the things, if you go to something like a reInvent or a Reinforce or any of the conferences, you'll always hear about stories of people who are probably at the cutting edge of these things, or people who are pioneering a lot of things. But as you said, a lot of what happens in the real world can often be quite different. So that's something to bear in mind. And the keynotes, I think as you'll go through the security updates as well, I think people will start to see a trend of how the important things that they kind of mentioned in terms of themes will come through the product launches. So obviously everything that they say and every theme that they would sort of make allusion to has a meaning, and usually it'll lead to some sort of a product or an update, because that's what they're trying to obviously get to as well. Just finishing off, I guess, the keynote side of things, there are a few other keynotes. So there was one from Peter DeSantis, who's the AWS Utility Computing VP. So it was called Monday Night. So it's kind of like Saturday night show. So if utility computing is something you're interested in, you may want to check it out. There was also a keynote from Swami Sivasubramaniam, who's the VP of Data and Machine Learning. We did hear a lot of really interesting comments for that particular one, just because machine learning and data is something that a lot of people are currently interested in. And a lot of cloud security, this is something that I sensed, is becoming a lot about protecting data. So that is another theme that came out through these conversations, that cloud security or any sort of cybersecurity is becoming a lot about data, because there is so much data out there, and data is and has been people's biggest asset as well. So that was something quite interesting. There was also a keynote from Ruba Bono, who was the Channels and Alliances VP. And there was a customer keynote from, as she said, from someone from Ferrari as well. So those are all there. Just a quick note, all of these talks are actually there on YouTube. So if you do want to watch any of them, and while we made note of all these keynotes, and we'll talk to some of the talks that we really enjoyed, you can actually find all of them fully available on YouTube. So if that's how you want to spend your Saturday or Sunday, you can. But if you just want to TLDR, then I guess we should be able to. We've got you covered, I think.
I think just an estimate, I would think we have gone through at least 50, 60 hours of content, at least, for
You need a
sure,
life.
between keynotes and between all of this. But hey, we did this so that you don't have to do it. So at least this way, at least you get some value out of it. And yeah, let's get into the announcements.
Perfect. I think before the announcements, do you want to just go through the talks and the leadership sessions that you enjoyed?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So another thing that I normally talk about usually is the fact that when you go on to reInvent, there are a few sessions that normally take place. Now, they obviously subdivide all of the sessions that are going to run over 300 sessions into different categories. You have your security category. You have also got cloud operations and a lot of other things. But one category that I also look out for is leadership sessions. The reason I do that is because most of the time, what you'll find is, again, kind of like the CEO, CTO, this is now the next layer. Most of them would have customers come and talk about where do they see as a challenge in cloud. Some of the talks that I've actually listed out only 4 because there are just so many, but I felt the 4 were most relevant. Some of them actually had customers come as panel, whereas some of them were more focused on, hey, this is kind of where we believe Amazon will head towards, or this is what Amazon is doing to solve a problem. The first one was the developer experience. I think the reason I picked this one was because for people who are thinking about working with Netflix or how Netflix does their thing, a lot of the themes that come out from there, and a few of our guests in the past have said this as well, is a focus on developer experience as to how do we make a tool that is adopted by developers, loved by developers, which makes our job easy. And this particular leadership session was run by someone named Adam. He's the vice president for developer experience, and he also had another person with him. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the person. She's a very popular engagement community person as well. But the idea being, they were talking about why developer experience is important. How do they do it? And how can you also take part in that? Talk was called Delighting Developers Builder Experience at AWS. That was the topic of the talk. And that was pretty good. So if you want to know how to make developers happy and make them adopt their tools, that was the best to go for. Now, the next one was from the AWS CISO, CJ Moses. CJ Moses spoke about accelerating innovation at AWS Security. Now, for people who have been going to AWS reInvent for a long time, there used to be something called State of Union for Security by Steve Schmidt. I don't know why it was not done this time. I didn't see that video yet. Maybe it was. Maybe I missed the session. But if someone finds the session, definitely share that with me. But that used to be really good because it would talk about the overall state of AWS themselves, where they see that it would go from a security perspective as well. So, but this was still good. A lot of themes from CJ Moses around what does he see as would be upcoming. And he's also shared his love for car racing with his bright and shiny shoes. Got 2 more. One was the executive panel, where there were people from PagerDuty, Expedia Group, and Nubank coming and talking about how can you change culture in the age of cloud, which I think is an important one. Now, if you're a technical person, you may choose to ignore this particular one, but as someone who's working towards becoming a leader in an organization, a cybersecurity leader or a technical leader, I would definitely recommend checking this out, because at the end of the day, most of the things that you develop would stop at the point when it stops. And if there is no culture of having people come and talk to you and share what they can do from security, it just doesn't work. So there was a good talk from that perspective to hear how PagerDuty, Expedia Group, and Nubank do it. Their last and final one, this is basically, there were customers from Disney Streaming and Intuit, and they were talking about data. And the talk was called Your Data, You Need It, Where You Need It, When You Need It. And it had people who had video recordings from who are Disney Streaming as well as Intuit. Now, as Shilpi has been saying, you would notice a theme here as well as the conversation so far. Data seems to get a lot of limelight. Culture is getting a lot of limelight. We should develop a good culture. And some form of creativity. Developers are getting a lot of importance as well, which you've called out earlier, that people who have been trying to DevSecOps for a long time, and in 2023, we still haven't achieved DevSecOps. I probably would say that the only other theme which was left out from the event-driven architecture as well is Zero Trust. There were a lot of themes around, as you can see, already popping from based on what Shilpi is sharing. But that was some of the leadership sessions that I really enjoyed.
I was just going to say the one that you mentioned about culture in the age of cloud, I definitely believe that security is one of those things that only technology can only take you so far. And I think with everybody that we've spoken to through all these 3-4 years, I think there's culture plays such an important piece. So I would probably flip the notion a little bit more. And I said, even if you are technical, I would still say watch this, because I think conversations around culture are important. And whether you are an engineer or a security leader, I think being familiar with what's happening within the culture and how that can be optimized to drive security, good security in your organization is important. So I definitely enjoyed that one. But yeah, there were so many sessions to pick from. So it was really, really hard. And I think we probably still have some that we haven't probably gotten across to as well. So I think there's lots of really good sessions and there's something for everyone. But the ones that we have watched and really enjoyed. So there was one from someone called Baker Tilly from LLP, and they had a talk around sort of building and scaling a modernization strategy. So that was really interesting. There was a talk from Robin Hood as well, and this was about deploying egress traffic controls in production environment. So a technical topic, but something that was really interesting in terms of how they have kind of achieved that in their organization.
Shout out to Houston Hopkins, who was at that talk as well.
Yes, he's one of our favorite guests on the podcast. So definitely shout out to him for a really interesting talk. We did also really enjoy the one from Netflix. It was talking about reimagining multi-account deployment for security and speed. And we actually got a chance to speak to the speakers, and you actually might see them on something that's going to be released very soon. But really interesting about how they have taken, and I think Netflix is really well known for this, about taking novel approaches to things. They have a really good team internally as well. So that was something really interesting. Again, technical, but an interesting sort of viewpoint as to how they've achieved that within their organization. The next one that we really enjoyed was how to monitor applications across multiple accounts. And this was one that was given by JP Morgan Chase. Again, something that was really, really interesting from an organization that obviously is dealing with a lot of data, a lot of sensitive data, and how they've done that across multiple accounts was really interesting to see. The next one was AWS Well Architect Framework Security Pillar, Cloud Security at Scale from Molex. So that was something really, really interesting as well. I think it tied in quite well with the AWS month that we've been running as well. And we've had some conversations around architecture. So I felt like listening to this was quite a good complement to the month that we've run, and kind of just like really led on the discussions that we've been having in terms of what does a well architect framework look like and the security pillar in that. And if you are doing cloud security at scale, what are certain things that you need to be mindful of as well? So that was really valuable from that perspective, especially if you are someone who works with AWS and is building architectures, or you're a security architect. This could be a session that would be quite valuable. The next one was best practices for organizing and operating on AWS from Werner Brother. That was a really, really good session that had a lot of insights in terms of how to do things in AWS. Obviously, most of these talks are obviously for AWS because it's Reinvent. So that provided some really good insights. There was another one called Build Securely on AWS Insights from the C-Suite, where we had people from Delta Airlines and Asurion. That was really good because I think from my perspective, I'm always sort of interested in how leaders are doing certain things. And this was really interesting just to sort of have that insight as well, because sometimes people who are in the C-suite would have that very different lens because they're looking at an organization from a holistic view. And the things that they pointed out in that talk were quite interesting. I just wanted to quickly go back to the one on Warner Brothers. So I think we met with Bianca as well, who was one of the speakers from there from Warner Brother Discovery. And it was really interesting because they have sort of done a transition into cloud and sort of multi-cloud, and how they've kind of made that work. And I think there were certain things that she called out that really resonated about just like some basics that we forget about, as we were saying, things like culture, paying attention to some of the bare basics. I think that was sort of a good point as well. Speaking of HBO Max or Warner Brothers Discoveries, there was another talk which I'll give, and that was around AWS security services for container threat detection. A little bit more technical, that particular one, but again, containers are becoming so popular. People are utilizing them so much these days. And this was something that gave us a lot of information in terms of how do you do threat detection properly in AWS containers. The next one, and sorry, I'm just sort of going through these quickly in interest of time, because trying to wrap up everything that you need to pay attention to in AWS Reinvent in 45 minutes is quite the task. So idea to production on Amazon SageMaker from Thomson Reuters. So Amazon SageMaker is quite a popular Amazon service or AWS service. So it was really good to hear from someone who's utilizing it and someone who's using it in production as to what are some of the things that they're experiencing as well. We did have a couple of nods from Australian banks at Reinvent, so that was nice to see. So we had NAB gave a talk about how NAB transformed the self-service experience with Amazon Connect and machine learning. So that was one interesting one. And also Commonwealth Bank spoke about their compliance journey. And I know Ashish, you actually have sort of spoken with them about compliance as well. So that was something that I know that they're quite passionate about. So it was really interesting also to see, what are the things that are working for them? What are their learnings? Especially if you are a financial organization in Australia, you might want to check that particular one out. And the last one we did have, so again, this notion of this attention on developer, it was really good to see a talk around dev first security. So from code to cloud and back to code. And this was from someone in Neiman Marcus. And they shared their journey about how they've implemented dev first security and why that is important. So a few good talks there, I think. And it's like there are so many good talks, but these are more from like just a cloud security perspective. I think these are ones that kind of give that good balance of how things are being done in different organizations.
I think another favorite one was, and this is the fine one to add into this list, the running services without access to data. This was an Amazon talk, quite a favorite for a lot of security people out there. So definitely check that out. It's just an understanding of how do you work with applications without giving them credentials, so that even if the application was compromised, you're not really losing anything at that point in time. On that note, I think we have spoken enough about the favorite topics and the keynote highlights, and we've at the half an hour mark as well. Now let's get into the announcements as well.
Yes, let's get into the announcement. So we've kind of broken it down into different categories just to sort of give a bit of a theme. So the first one would be any new products that they've released. The next one, we're going to talk about any updates to their existing security products and services. And the third one is going to be, we're going to flip it, and it's going to be any security updates to existing products.
Right in the end, we have the bonus round for any services which are not cloud security products, but are going to have an impact as well. So that was the extra section we added.
Love it. Perfect. So firstly, Security Lake. I think everyone would have heard about it. There was so many rumblings and discussions on what this means. So yes, AWS has released AWS Security Lake. It's going to be their managed security data lake, and it can combine various different security data sets for this. And it's under the open cybersecurity schema framework. So there's a framework that a lot of different organizations are aligned to, and it would support things like AWS integration with Security Hub, and also collect directly from things like your VPC logs, your CrowdTrail, your Route 53 logs. So that was one that everyone was excited about. AWS Verified Access. Now that is something that is a new product or service that they have released, but it's still in preview. And it's really just a secure connection service that allows you to sort of look at your local and remote secure access to an application without a VPN. And the last service, the actual service also that they announced, was Amazon Verified Permission. So it is about managing fine-grained permission and authorization with custom application. Now, what is fine-grained, you might ask? So the way I understood it, and I'll be happy for anyone to comment if you've got a better explanation, but I think it's kind of combining the best of RBAC and ABAC, so your role-based and attributed-based. Some people are saying that this could be really interesting and could be an interesting alternative to OPA as well. So those were the sort of new services or services that were announced and from a security perspective. Now, in terms of updates to existing security products, and I think this is something that AWS have been doing since Reinforce. So it's been a lot about updates to existing products. So there's Amazon Inspector now scans for AWS Lambda functions for vulnerabilities. So Amazon Inspector is something that is quite popular for vulnerability management. So now it scans for AWS Lambda functions, and I think people were quite excited by this. Amazon GuardDuty is their threat detection service. Now it allows for RDS protection. So this is something that people think would be valuable, but is currently in preview. So it'll be interesting as to how that actually transpires. And they've also released Container RunTime detection, which is going to be coming soon. So that is again one of those things that people are excited about. So Amazon GuardDuty is getting a few upgrades, which kind of leads on from what happened at Reinforce, because we did see that they released malware protection for EBS volumes and integration with Security Hub. So Amazon GuardDuty is really becoming one of those, I guess, superheroes with a lot of belts on. So that got quite a bit of an upgrade, or there's things coming soon. So stuff to watch out for that might Amazon GuardDuty might end up becoming a powerful tool for you to use. Amazon Macie so now has automated data discovery, so which means that you can actually look into your sensitive data at a lower cost. Again, Amazon Macie was something at Reinforce that got S3 object validation capability. So there is that theme of there are certain services and products that AWS is really choosing to uplift. And you can see that theme sort of coming through the year as well. There was AWS Cloud Tower, which now in console you can have manage and enforce your governance rules on there, and it also has a new controls library section. So there's more than 300 controls now available on AWS Control Tower, so you can just do more in terms of your governance rules on there. So AWS config rules also now supports proactive compliance. So again, in your console for AWS config, you can actually pick a proactive mode, which allows you to test for compliance before your is being rolled out. This is again something compliance or config rules or something they were paying attention towards, even at Reinforce where they added compliance scores to it. There was AWS Key Management Service, now supports external key store. So this will be really valuable if you have a regulatory requirement to use and store your encryption keys on-prem or outside AWS, so you can do that now. Amazon Virtual Private Cloud now has VPC Lattice, and this is in preview. So what is VPC Lattice? It's just going to be something that's going to give you a consistent way to connect, secure, and monitor communication between your services. I'm just saying AWS and Amazon so many times.
This was calling out why there's a difference between Amazon and AWS as well.
Yes, that was the fun fact. It's called AWS if it's a service or a product that's been made by AWS, but it gets the Amazon name. So it'll be called, say, Amazon CloudWatch if the origin was back in Amazon. So they actually created this service or product for Amazon, being Amazon, the big shop. And then it kind of translated into a service for the wider audience to use. So if you've ever wondered why certain things, and I used to wonder this, I'm like, why is something AWS and why is something Amazon? That's the reason. So that's a bit of a fun fact for you. But getting back to it, Amazon CloudWatch now has cross-account observability, so which means that you can observe and monitor resources and applications on AWS and on-prem and on other clouds. So you're going to be able to do things like searching, analyzing, and correlating your cross-account telemetry data. So that is quite interesting, and I know a few security folks are really excited about that one as well. So those were kind of like updates to current security products. And as you would see as a theme, there were a lot of them that had gotten updates in Reinforce. So your GuardDuty, your Macie, your AWS Control Tower, config with compliance. So there are certain things that they're really paying attention to. So if you start to see from what they do through the year, you can kind of get an understanding of which of the security products they're trying to really uplift. There were some other products as well that got a security lens, which was good to see because sometimes you have other products that don't have a security feature. So that was something that was added. So you can actually now delegate the management of your organization's governing policy. So this was just to achieve a bit more agility and decentralization. There's backup. So if you use AWS Backup, now it supports AWS CloudFormation. So it's stateless resources in stack like AWS IAM and AWS VPC, but it also supports Amazon Redshift. So that's going to be able to allow you to protect your data from automatic and manual snapshots. Another thing, and this is something that people were really excited about from Dr. Vogel's keynote, was this notion of Amazon EventBridge pipes, which is now generally available. So it's going to, and the intention is that things are just going to be a little more simpler, consistent, and cost-effective to create that point-to-point integration between someone who's producing an event and someone who's consuming it. So it's going to go beyond just your scheduling. So it's like pipes on steroids. That's what I heard one person say. And you'll be able to easily stitch AWS services together and build advanced integrations. The next one, I think, Ashish, did you want to cover that, which is just relevant for cloud security, but not security products?
Yeah, no, thank you for covering the cloud security topics. I think that's just to add on that last section, also organization is also now supporting delegated administrators. What this means for people is that there has been a notion of everyone has a lot of AWS accounts, and how do you isolate certain parts of your AWS account from people that they become quote unquote no touch zone? That is where the delegated admin for your organization perspective and from your backup perspective is really important. For people who come from a traditional networking background, you probably realize this, that there's always certain parts of your IT network which are a no-go zone unless you have specifically given access for just in time or for a very short time period. And that's for delegated administrator is now being done for organizations as well as backup. So that's a really interesting service. All right. Now, talking about services that have been announced, which are in preview, or at least at the time of this recording, they are in preview and would be something we should look out for as a cloud security person. The first one being AWS Application Composer. Now, people have tried building infrastructure in AWS. It's really hard to kind of visualize what that would look like. And sometimes the whole notion of I have an infrastructure as code that's been provided by someone, I have no idea how this is going to work. So from that perspective, the idea of it is really good. So I don't know, because it's in preview, I haven't tried it yet. But the idea being, if you have an existing infrastructure as code template, or if you have some idea for what you want your architecture to have, then both those options are technically going to be supported by Application Composer. The first option, where it's an IAC that you already have, you can use a CloudFormation template or a SAMP to basically recreate an infrastructure architecture that was left by someone. Or you could just use a drag and drop tool on a browser, and you should be able to create what an architecture that you need. And you should be able to get a output, which is a IAC again, which is an infrastructure as code template, and use that to deploy into AWS. Now, talking about deploying into AWS also leads me to the next service, which is AWS Code Catalyst, which is again in preview. If you notice a theme, the Application Composer talks about, hey, I want to make this as take the guesswork out of the whole serverless ready Amazon services kind of a thing, where I just want to be able to create an IAC because I know where the future is and I know that's what I want. This is great from a perspective that they're trying to drive automation and making it easier and easier for people to do automation. And Code Catalyst is in line with this as well. They're trying to be a single platform for your software development lifecycle. It would have integration with your GitHub, Bitbucket, Jira, and basically everything that you require for you to work with as a software developer. They're trying to combine all of that in one particular place. Now, I must call out, they have tried this before, and I see as a business why they want to do this, because if I was them, having a control over anyone who's fully Amazon, and if you can make them use the software development lifecycle in Amazon, that is probably the best thing you can do for them, because that just means more you get using that service, the more you would use the existing services of Amazon for a software development lifecycle. Instead of using, which you typically see anywhere, is you may have a GitHub or a GitLab or Bitbucket as your repository, or maybe even a private repository. For a CI/CD, you may have, some people may use Jenkins, some people maybe even one more layer down. You could use Jenkins, or you could use Azure to deploy into AWS, or use AWS themselves, or you could also have IAC templates defined in Terraform because you wanted to be cloud agnostic. Like, there's a lot of options at the moment, which makes people go away from Amazon, and Amazon has to build integrations for it. So Code Catalyst, I think, is their attempt to be that unified platform where they allow you to use your existing tool for now. I want to say for now because I know in 2023 they would try and push people to just go fully Code Catalyst. And for people who don't work in Amazon or have not seen work in Amazon, usually every year there's a theme. When you start talking to Amazon, you would notice that there's a push for a few services by your solution architect from Amazon. They're really pushing hard for, hey, why don't you use this service for that? So I believe when this becomes available, Code Catalyst would definitely be something that would be pushed hard for a lot of people. And so an Application Composer would be pushed hard for a lot of cloud engineers who are trying to learn about cloud engineering but don't know how to do IAC and want to be able to create that as well. So that's the two updates that I want to share. The other one is probably not as important, but this was announced a day before, as it does. Leading up to AWS Reinvent, there are a few announcements, which Shilpi has covered most of them. One of them that I wanted to add was a company, Wickr, which was bought by AWS a long time ago. Now, AWS Wickr was still not GA for a long time, and now it's finally GA. It's basically an end-to-end encrypted messaging platform, primarily used by public sector. So if you're from the public sector, Wickr is now GA, generally available to everyone.
It was in preview in Reinforce. I remember when we had covered that. Yeah, so I think it's good to see that as GA. But I do agree, it is something that is very heavily focused on the government organization.
I was going to take another angle here as well. You know how you mentioned AWS Reinvent? I was trying to think of what was covered in AWS Reinforce, and now we are looking at AWS Reinvent as well. there is this whole thing around, there's certain themes on this side. We see a lot more security updates to existing products. It was a lot of the same on the other side. Like, I think the one service that they announced, which was really interesting, was IAM Roles Anywhere. And on this side, we basically just saw a lot of features being updated, but there's no strikingly new service, which is like, oh my God, like there's this new service announced that's going to change my life. Like, some people may find that the verified permission, verified access may change their life. But I don't know how many people are going to use AWS Security Lake. But that's where the excitement of this is.
But I think that was very common about, like, even in Reinforce, there was no new security products. But in saying that, like, do we really need more services from AWS? I'm happy with like just making what we've got if those are being made better. And maybe that's a better strategy from their perspective, rather than just create more of, let's just try and make what we have better. So I think that's what they are doing. They've made updates to Inspector, GuardDuty. I think last time they had made updates to other security, like in Reinforce, they made updates to these services, but also other services. So I think that probably would be the theme for 2023. And don't quote me on that, but maybe one of my predictions is that we will continue to see more upgrades, because we have probably come to a point where a lot of the cloud providers have released some good services, but they're just not quite there yet. And hopefully they are listening to customers and people that they're working with and finding ways to improve it. They're probably also looking at some interesting vendors and seeing how they can implement some of those things in-house as well, so that we do see a little bit of that happening as well.
Oh, you and I were talking about this, which would be really interesting, is to cover all the other cloud providers for looking back at what is Amazon, Google Cloud, and Azure done for 2022, and what does that mean for 2023? If you also are listening, that was a great idea from Shilpi. And if you want to hear more about it, you should probably, Zina just mentioned, there's seriously no more services from AWS.
I agree. I totally agree, Zina. Like, seriously, like whatever's there is enough. I'm happy with improving updates that have happened, though they may not seem revolutionary. I think for a lot of people who are using these services, those little changes, like I know the EventBridge one, and as you mentioned, like the two that are currently in preview, the Composer and Code Catalyst. I think people are excited about it, just to see what the potential of that is. I think the updates that were made to the RDS Protection, I think that is something that people are excited about, because
even that blue-green thing that you can do. So earlier, doing a blue-green deployment for RDS was not a thing, but now you can do blue-green deployments for RDS. That's a good thing.
That's what I wanted to say. So though it is really exciting, I think Apple has trained us for it, that whenever you go to a keynote, you're like, what's new? And is there a new product? But in a way, I think in a cloud context, maybe just updates to current good services that people are using is
in a way, AWS Reinvent was like an Apple event. There was the iPhone 14 was not really that dramatically different to iPhone 13.
Yeah, I think maybe Apple's going down the same path as well. So there you go. Technology will incrementally improve unless people are using all the AI stuff that's happening. So I think there's lots of interesting things happening in that space.
We should definitely do the episode on the Amazon, Google, and Azure thing. But folks, if you want that episode, you should definitely drop us a comment and let us know that you want.
I think that's something that we are interested in, and we are sort of looking at just for our interest, because I definitely do get interested in, like, can I see a theme? Are they all sort of doing the same things, or are they tracking in different directions? So if you do want to hear about that, let us know. Or if there's anything else, as always, we love to get feedback from you.
Awesome. That was most of the episode. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We have a audio event for this in about half an hour as well, so that Shilpi and I can actually have some breakfast and then come back to this. But I am looking forward to the audio discussion, as to get to hear from all of you as well, as to what you feel about the announcement.
Yeah, did we miss anything, or what was your favorite talk? We will be releasing a couple of articles as well as a sort of a follow-on from this. So if I spoke too quickly and you weren't able to take notes, obviously you can rewatch this on YouTube as well. There will be some articles coming out later on as well. But yeah, do join us for the audio event. We always love to hear from you guys, and just a forum for us to like openly chat about these things and share how many services AWS has, and we don't want any more. But yeah, do join us for that. But otherwise, thank you so much. This is our final episode for 2022, and we're going to be back in 2023 with a lot of exciting things. We've actually got a lot of really interesting episodes already booked in, and some really incredible people. Your teaser, you may actually hear from some of the people that we've mentioned who did give talks at AWS. So lots of exciting stuff coming through. But thank you so much for everything in 2022. We have loved doing this, and we're looking forward to coming back and sharing so much more in 2023.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
See ya.